What I've found in my life is an underrated skill is understanding the vibe, reading the signs, going with the flow, call it whatever you like. Now, when you grow up in Jamaica, where tourism is a major industry, you understand the vibe and you start a career in hospitality. Now, working at high-end resorts, you master the ability to interact with people from many different languages, cultures, and countries. Your job is to create an environment where diverse people from all over the world and learn about and enjoy each other's company. Now, if people can enjoy and accept each other for 1 or 2 weeks, why can't it consistently occur? My guest today, Dr. Winsome Chunnu, and she has made this her life's goal. Let's meet her. She's a first-generation student who earned her undergraduate degree in hospitality, administration, and management. No surprise there, she grew up in Jamaica. It's at Huston Tillotson University, which is a private, historically Black university in Austin, Texas. She earned a master's degree in political science, international relationships, and a doctor of philosophy and cultural studies from Ohio University. Today, she serves as Ohio University Senior Director for Diversity Education Initiatives. Winsome, welcome to Life Altering Events.
Thank you so much, Frank. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We had a conversation a few weeks ago, and you told me about your background, which I thought was intriguing. So please share that with the audience around the world.
Yes, so I was born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica. Straight out of high school, I went to work at a resort, and I was at the time, some people call them playmakers, but at where I worked, which was Franklin View Resort in Runaway Bay, FDR, we were entertainment coordinators. So if you've been in a cruise ship or you've been to a hotel and you hear people on the microphone running around saying, we're going to play bingo, or we're going to do this or that, that's what I did. Then I moved up and I moved to the front desk, and I was a receptionist at the front desk. Then I became the front desk manager. So while I was in that job, I got an opportunity to study at Hocking College in Nelsonville, Ohio. And that was where I got my associate degree first in hotel management. And I tell everybody, and they're like, Nelsonville, Ohio, nobody even knows where that is. And I said, it's an awesome school. Their culinary arts team was nationally ranked the entire time I was there. You would be hard pressed to go to Jamaica and be at any major resort where you've not met someone who studied at Hocking College at some point.
Wow.
Yes, they have a history that goes back way, way back to like the late 1970s, early 1980s. But before that, I went to Western Hospitality Institute in Jamaica. That hotel school created the opportunity for me to come and study in the United States, and the rest is history. I went on to Texas. I was there when George Bush was the governor at the time with Bush v. Gore. That was an exciting time to be, and I was in Austin, only like 3 minutes from the governor's mansion. That's where my school is located. Mm-hmm. And so I was caught up in all of that, even though at the time I wasn't even, I was just here on a student visa. Uh-huh. But I love politics. It's actually my first love. And so I was outside the governor's mansion, not protesting, because there were it was so funny. There were 3 groups of people. One group is saying Bush, Bush, Bush. One group is saying Gore, Gore, Gore. And then another group in the middle saying, it's not about Bush, it's not about Gore, it's about the New World Order. Wow. So it was a really exciting time to be in Austin, Texas at that time. And yes, then I made my way back to Ohio University, and have been here since, and doing the work and trying to do everything that I can around anything to do with accessibility, accessibility, marginalized populations, etc.
So the move from the hospitality world, where you had to engage with all kinds of different people
Mm-hmm.
and move into politics and cultural studies. Uh, is it the Texas experience that triggered that? Was that the inspiration for it?
No, very, I was actively involved in politics in Jamaica as a student, even though I couldn't vote. And our former Prime Minister, Michael Manley, I consider to be one of the leaders that I've admired for the rest of my life. I admired him. I actually presented a paper on him being a public intellectual at Yale at a conference several years ago. But he was the person the prime minister that introduced minimum wage, leave for pregnant mothers, like really set the foundation in Jamaica for a lot of the social benefits that we enjoy today. Free education. He started a program called Jamal, which was designed for people who were adults but couldn't read. And so he laid that foundation. He was also very, very close friends with Fidel Castro. Which
Well, that's a little different spin.
Which made the US very unhappy at the time. And yeah, that's a rabbit hole, but I mean, I can talk about it. But he was, because one of the things he said was that Jamaica's foreign policy wouldn't be dictated by the United States. Instead, Cuba at the time was providing, and they still do, in terms of education and health, is a leader in the Caribbean. And we had Cuban teachers, doctors, nurses in Jamaica that played a vital role within our education and our healthcare system. But it was also, if we think of the Cold War and everything else that was happening, he was also very good friends with Nyerere in Tanzania. So at the time, he studied at the London School of Economics, Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana. So at the time, there was this group of leaders who really was pushing a socialist agenda for developing countries because we needed it. And one of the things he talked about is at the time when multilateral institutions were formed, like the UN, the World Bank, etc. What we know now as the third world, our developing countries, didn't exist because we were all members of a colonial government in some fashion.
Mm-hmm.
So we weren't independent. And when independence started happening, the 1960s, 70s, even up to the 1980s, then these countries needed to find a way to think about their status in the global community. And he and Castro became very good friends. And yes, and like I said, the US was really unhappy. And there are allegations, well, it's published now, that the US actually came in and did some destabilization of our country, of Jamaica, during the 1980s.
That's an interesting story. It's the thing that what you spoke about, having been in Jamaica, was this drive for education and doing it different because you had the opportunity there. There wasn't a lot of education, and you needed to get it done. So that you didn't have to follow the old traditional models, right? You could create something. And when we spoke earlier, one of the things you said to me that was just intriguing was, it's time to rethink the educational system here. So what changes would you like to see coming, or do you feel need to happen?
So there are several I there's so many thoughts going on in my head, I don't even know where to start. Okay. One of the things that for me, because I live in Ohio, that I find problematic is that our schools are funded according to property tax. So if you are in a wealthy neighborhood, then in the 1980s, I think it was Bill Moore who did a documentary. And in that documentary, he actually was in Ohio.
Mhm.
And he visited two schools. One school he visited in somewhere in Cleveland, I think it was. The roof was leaking. They had no computers, and they still had encyclopedias that said, one day we'll get a man to the moon.
Oh my goodness. This is in 1980.
I think it was in the 1980s that this documentary was done.
Wow.
Then he visited another school in Dublin, Ohio, which is a wealthy neighborhood.
Right.
And they had pool and gym and computers and everything else. But also that's a wealthy neighborhood. So there's a tax base that is there. So I firmly believe we need to move away from that model, because what it does is further keep people who belong to marginalized communities within school systems that is not designed for them to advance. So that's one big thing that we should be looking at. The other thing we should be looking at is diversifying teachers, faculty, staff, etc. Right? I shared with you when we spoke before that in 2014, they said that the statistics that came out was that the largest kindergarten class that came in 2014 were people who are from diverse backgrounds.
Correct.
That has implications. You're not seeing any teacher that looks like you. The research also shows that students from diverse background benefit from having diverse teachers, and that what's something like 86% of teachers are white females. And the research shows that particularly with Black boys, they do not do a good job of helping them navigate the system. And so diversifying our professors, teachers, etc. is important. Representation is important. It's important that we can see ourselves as professors and we can see ourselves as university administrators. That is crucial. And of course, this goes across, whether it's higher ed, K through 12, etc., high school, it cuts across the board. The other piece we need to really seriously begin to think about is how we fund education in terms of what students are paying. Everybody's pushing on President Biden right now regarding student loan forgiveness. There are so many people that are drowning in debt. And we seriously, as a country, need to have a serious conversation around what that means for us long term. Because one of the things we talk about for marginalized populations is your way out is to get a good education. You're not all going to be superstars, basketball players, football players, singers, actors. Your way out is education. The same thing in Jamaica. Education is emphasized as one's vehicle or opportunity out of poverty. And if the most marginalized people in our society are the ones who are unable to access this vehicle, then what message are we sending about who we value, generational trauma?
Mm-hmm.
How are people able to move on and learn and grow and help their families if they're stuck in a cycle? And of course, they also tend to be on the lower socioeconomic side of the ladder. So they tend to be poor. And with poverty comes what? Social ills, crime, drug. Look at what is going on in Ohio with the opioid epidemic, right? Teenage pregnancy, etc. And so it's a cycle that they're kept in because they're still unable to access this vehicle that we're told is your way out. So we seriously need to have a conversation around how expensive it is to access college.
Exactly.
As well as the returns afterwards.
I used to, when I was in the tech world, I traveled extensively, and I used to go to Switzerland quite a bit. And in Switzerland, in the United States, you come and visit, we take you to a restaurant. In Switzerland, they take you to your house, right? I'm in this house in the Alps with this president of a bank. And he said to me, Frank, you know the reason why the United States became a power after World War II? And I said, tell me. I'm in your country. I'm not going to argue with you, right? He says, the GI Bill. A whole generation went to college that would have never gone to college, and they went for free. And then he said to me, why did you stop that? And I said, well, no one asked me personally. I'm a veteran, and I just had enough money to barely cover my rent with the GI Bill. But I said, well, how do you do it? And he says, when you get out of school, secondary school, high school for them, you have to spend 2 years doing something in the military, social service job, something like a Peace Corps, Job Corps, something along those lines. But you have something to do every day, get up every day for 2 years and go do something. Then you go to school free. And he said a 20-year-old, much different than an 18-year-old when they start college. And there's a focus. And that's a way that you can get people educated without having to go into debt. And another thing you said to me was which ties into this, is that in the post-colonial world, you'd mentioned it was never in the plans to educate the masses, correct?
Nope, it was not.
And so now we have this continuation. What I've heard from a number of educators is we have this continuation of a process that's probably way past its time. It's almost like best practice. Best practice is a point in time. It's not stone. And these are the things we have to change. Correct?
Yes. Education was, and we talk about this, particularly those of us in post-colonial societies, education was, at the time when it was conceptualized, it wasn't designed for all. That's number one. And if we look at the history of education in Jamaica, for example, and we see it across the Caribbean, some countries in Africa as well, a lot of the schools started out because the churches decided that they wanted to teach people to read so they could read the Bible. That's one. Two, a lot of the elite high schools that are in Jamaica, they started because the planter class from Britain, they needed somewhere for their children to go to school. So a lot of what drove the system, so from its inception, it was two-tiered. The planters' kids went here, the people who are managing the colonial government, their kids went here, and then the poor people, their kids went here. And a lot of that is still evident within our school system in Jamaica. But we see it here also in the United States. Go back to what I was talking about, the school in Cleveland versus the school in Dublin.
Exactly.
It's the same concept without the plantation piece. And we still have not, yes, have we done some good things? come a long way. Yeah, there's been some changes because people who never had access to higher education now are able to access it historically, but not everyone.
Mhm.
And for me, the change isn't coming as fast enough for what we need to be doing. And if we really want to get to some form of equity in some way. And again, we say education is the vehicle. Go to school, study a book. That's what, go to school, study a book. The heights of great men reached and kept were not attained by sudden flight, but they, while their companions slept, kept toiling upwards through the night. That was what it was beat into our heads in Jamaica.
Yes.
Study a book. Then you study a book, you get this job, now you can't afford to pay back your loans. You study a book, you get this job, you can't afford to do X or Y because you are so in debt.
Yes.
And so now people are asking, if you look at the chapter now on particularly among millennials, and older-ish Gen Zers, is I can't afford to buy a house. So, there's this divide, right, with the boomers and the millennials and the Gen Zers, right? When I was your age, I already had a house. Well, when you were my age, you were making a living wage and you bought your house for $40,000, which is now worth $500,000. And so they're like, why isn't this generation reproducing? And the millennials and the Gen Zs are saying, we can't afford to have children. I'm just going to have this one dog. Even though depending on the kind of dog you have, they're not cheap.
Exactly.
But nevertheless, they're like, we can't afford it. We're drowning in debt, and we can't even find a job that is paying us enough where we can afford a car payment or loan payment and a mortgage, plus healthcare, plus all the other things that one needs to do to survive. And this is just really minimal. Why are all these millennials still sleeping in their parents' basement?
Exactly. One of the things I talk at places where there are millennial and Gen Zers. And one of the things that I hear them say a lot is they're not teaching anything that's relevant anymore. Now, that's an over exaggeration. Like, for example, why are we not doing more with AI? Why are we not doing more with the impact of social media in education? And how is that going to come into play? Because that's the world they live in.
Yeah.
That's where they live. And it's not going to go away.
No. It's just, in my opinion, it's going to get worse before it gets better because the technology is developing so fast. And I'm glad you brought up AI because we spoke about that as well. And one of the things the research is showing is that only 16% of professors are prepared to use AI in the classroom. All the students are using ChatGPT. That's right. Everybody is accessing it. And, they're saying some of the professors are intimidated by the technology, etc. But it's coming. And also, as an education system, we need to think really deeply about how we are going to prepare our students to respond to it. It's not coming, it's already here.
Yes.
So I was watching 60 Minutes, and there was a guest on, and they asked him about, I think I might have shared this with you as well, they asked him about AI. And he said, 60% of the jobs that we know in the way we know it right now will not exist in 10 to 15 years. Right. Chef, chauffeur, anything that's automated is going to go to AI. And he said, I don't want to sound like a doom and gloom, rain on your parade kind of person, but as human beings, we have responded to technological revolutions in time past. And he said, electricity, the sewing machine, cars displaced jobs, but those jobs were replaced with other jobs.
Right.
He said the difference with those technological revolutions, when they happened, is that it took a while for those to come about. And AI is coming a lot faster.
Right.
So what are we doing? What are we doing? How are we responding? A lot of universities now are offering courses around AI, but not everyone is. And again, who are the people that are left out of this conversation?
Exactly. Exactly.
The people who live in poor rural communities who have their internet is one swig above dial-up.
Right.
They're also not in spaces where these conversations are happening on a daily basis. They're not in classrooms, they're not on college campuses. So the people who are already marginalized, who are the ones doing a lot of those jobs that are automated, are gonna be the ones that the technologies will further marginalize because they're not a part of those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Playing off of
And
it,
so the more we advance is the more we continue to replicate systems of inequity. And I like AI. I utilize AI a lot.
mm-hmm.
But when you're thinking of it through a social justice lens, it's important to think about and talk about the historical legacies of marginalization and how this technology is also helping to kind of deepen some of those divides.
So it widens the gap even
Mm-hmm.
further. Now, one of the things that playing off that 60 Minutes, which I also saw that same show, and I interviewed Dr. Edward Hess, who's a futurist at the Darden School at Virginia, University of Virginia. And he said to me, just like your guy said, 65% of the children entering kindergarten today
Mm-hmm.
are going to work in a career or a field that doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't exist right now. And then he said, here is the opportunity for the education system to revamp all the way across the board, starting at the youngest levels, and start doing things like, he called it social and emotional learning.
Mm-hmm.
So you learn how to collaborate, you learn critical thinking skills, you learn how to work through issues, you become like designers looking for other better ways or different ways to accomplish things that are necessary. He says that's going to open things up. But she said, we have a system that's going to fight it. Right? So how do you bring about this change when the system, I think President Obama used to say, they got the haves and the have-nots, and the haves don't want to give it up.
Mm-hmm.
And the have-nots need it because you need to have that level of balance, because rising tide lifts all boats, as President Kennedy said. Yet there's this resistance to making it happen. What would you suggest we do?
A big part of the resistance, I strongly believe a big part of the resistance is rooted in fear. And we talked about this fear of the unknown.
Yes.
I don't know what AI is going to do. Is it going to write computer codes and then get into the nuclear system? We shouldn't trust this. We should make any move until we know for sure exactly what we're dealing with. Well, others are way ahead of other people within the technology sphere. And there's a saying, societies are a reflection of schools, and schools are a reflection of society.
It's good
Within
statement.
our society, we have these, again, we talk about President Obama, the haves and the have-not, the historically marginalized. And they've been shut out of any opportunity to advance because we also live in a capitalist society and we need workers.
Yes.
So from a practical standpoint, And so they are the ones that are making the wealthy wealthier, while they can barely afford food, rent, payment for car note, car loan, etc. You're making shareholders richer. So we're talking about, it's inflation, inflation, inflation. Yet companies are recording billions in profit right now. And they're buying back stocks, they're divvying out to shareholders, but prices on basic food items are going up. So the two things aren't matching.
Correct.
If we were in a genuine inflation, these companies shouldn't be raking in these billions of dollars in profit.
Correct, because their cost should be going up too.
Exactly. And then you raise the price of the goods to match the price of the raw material.
Correct.
And if our society is at its core unequal, then at its core, our school system will reflect aspects of inequity because we represent the society that we are in. And for those of us who do the social justice work, we talk a lot, where people are publishing, people are presenting at conferences saying education is the key. It's the only way we're going to be able to help the marginalized. We still have a system that's inequitable.
Exactly.
And when we look at the way education is even funded at the federal level, why are teachers buying their own supplies for their classrooms in the United States? But we're the wealthiest country in the world with the largest economy.
What's really interesting is we spoke about the American President, the movie with Michael Douglas, and he says the goal is to make you afraid of something and then tell you who's to blame for it. Right now, we start to see, because education is critical, because the population, as you said, the kindergartners are historically a minority, or right, but more and more states are trying to eliminate these programs.
Yep. I looked at the stats before, and for right now, 19 states. 19 states have bills introduced. Mississippi, they describe as on watch, meaning that they're going to introduce a bill soon. And so far, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, Tennessee, and Florida have signed anti-diversity bills into law. So what these bills are saying is you cannot use this money to fund these kinds of programs. But when you look at the kinds of programs they're talking about and the books that they're banning, these are programs and books that are telling the story of our country. Exactly. And there's a meme that says Ruby Bridges, the people who did not want her to go to school now do not want their grandkids to read about them not wanting her to go to school.
Exactly.
And so if we're at this point right now where our country is increasingly more diverse, which means our school system is increasingly more diverse, and we're taking away programs that are designed to help that population, because as we stated earlier, the system wasn't created for us. Right. So the programs that are there to give us access to spaces that we've been historically denied are now taken away. I am hard pressed to see how this is going to be helpful in the long run, particularly as we're talking about SELs, right? You know, social emotional. It is all about adaptability, learning, growing with people who are different, having conversations around difference. And if we are taking away programs that are designed to help our students grow in this area, then how are we preparing them to lead in a global world? Because that we're in a global world. We function within global spaces. Between TikTok, AI, and everything else, we're functioning in a global space consistently. And we're taking away tools that are designed to help our students learn how to function better or more effectively within a global space. I am hard pressed to see, and my heart is, I weep. I weep for this, the generations coming up, because being denied that kind of access, and then they leave and they get a job with the State Department, or they move to another state, and all of a sudden they have bug eyes because people are saying, you can't say that that's not appropriate. They were never taught that, because you can't say gay. You can't say white supremacy. You can't say homophobia, transphobia. They don't know those terminologies.
Right.
So we're preparing them just to function within that little space that they are in right now. And we're not helping them grow. And that is okay, to the point where we're legislating it.
Exactly. Exactly. One of the things
This
that,
does not bode well for our country at all.
no, it does not. One of the things that, and I don't know how many interviews I've done now, but it was when affirmative action and diversity and inclusion were labeled as race. Which they're not. They're not. It was never designed to be race ever. Affirmative action gave women the right to vote, gave them the right to have credit cards, which didn't happen until the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
The 1970s.
1974, that a woman was able to open her bank account on her own.
It gave accessibility for disabled.
Mm-hmm.
It gave student loans, part of diversity, veteran benefits. They're all part of these things. And I hear this and I say, well, I hear people say to me, well, Frank, that's a, what's that? It's a handout. And I said, no, I don't think it is a handout. So what I think it is it's opening up an opportunity. That's all. That's all. You have an
So
what you do with the opportunity.
There are two things I often say when people talk about affirmative action. So I say, keep in mind that affirmative action was signed into law by majority white men.
Yes.
That's number one. And number two, white women benefit from affirmative action more than any other group.
That's right.
And oftentimes that is not a part of the conversation, because there's some people so want to believe that it's given Black and brown people who are lazy free stuff, and they need to work and pull themselves up by the bootstrap just like everybody else. No, look at the number of people that are on welfare. It's more white people on welfare than Black people. But we don't want to have those conversations because it makes the conscious mind uncomfortable.
That's right.
Because people, even in the face of data, tend to engage in cognitive dissonance when it comes to certain topics.
Exactly. We then had, in one discussion we had, the gentleman brought up this affirmative action issue. And he said, affirmative action always existed. It's called legacy.
Yep.
And I spoke to someone at a big school, and asked him, you have a legacy program, correct? And he goes, well, of course. And I said, isn't that affirmative action? Isn't that giving someone an opportunity to get into the school because you made a lot of big donation to the college or you went to that school? And he goes, no, that's not the same. And I said, well, how is it not the same? You're being disingenuous here. Okay. So North Carolina, the gentleman I interviewed, Jonathan McCloy from North Carolina, he said, University of North Carolina, the lights went on. And he said, oh my God, they're going to be coming after legacy. They're going to be coming after athletic scholarships. They're going to become, because those are affirmative action programs that give an opportunity to people who may not have ever had that opportunity. And I think University of North Carolina is saying up to if you make less than $70,000, you go to school for free to try to get ahead of the curve. Right? But not every school can do that. They can't do that. And when I was looking back at my Switzerland story, and I brought this up many, many times over my life, doesn't that seem to make sense? For 2 years after high school, you're involved in something, be it the military or whatever. You're involved in, you don't have to go in the military, but whatever, some kind of service. And then you go back to school and the school is free. We can afford that as a country.
Of course we can. Yes, we can.
Exactly. The cost is minuscule when you compare it to, not to get political here, but when you compare it to the tax cut that went through. That is a minuscule amount of money to say we're going to have education for all. And they say, well, you have public education, Frank, you have public schools. I said, no, but there's equal and then there's equity. Equal is, yes, there's a school here. Equity is this school doesn't have the tools and the resources. That's not equity.
That's not equity. This school is still using encyclopedias while this school is using AI.
Exactly.
So if we truly, if we get really serious about providing equity regarding education in our country, we'd be amazed as a society at the major transformational shift it would have. If we really invest in education in a real and genuine way for all, we would be amazed.
I would agree.
But it's not the sexy thing on Capitol Hill.
No, it's not. And it's tapping into too many sacred cows, to use a poor analogy. And they don't want that. They don't want that to happen. I met with a group of teachers, and they're all members of the teachers union. They're wonderful people, and then they're educators, and they have a hard life, and they're not paid worth what they should be getting. But they fight to stop the change that could potentially come. Again, we go back to your fear statement. I'm going to lose something. You're going to take something from me. You're going to take my place at the table. Dr. McLeod from University of Central Florida told me, you're not taking away your seat at the table. We're expanding the table.
Absolutely.
And as
that's what we say, it's not because you get a piece of the pie, I'm not going to get a piece of the pie. That's not how it works. That's not the idea that for someone else to gain any kind of benefit means I am going to lose something is the narrative that we enter these conversations. So we come at it from a deficit model.
Correct.
I'm going to lose something if you get this. And therefore, in order for me to maintain, and it is always about people are thinking of themselves and their own status.
Correct.
This individualistic mindset is another, for me, it's another part of our society that is not helpful to us coming together.
Correct.
Me. And if you get this, it means I am not going to get it anymore. or now my piece is going to be a little bit smaller because I now have to share it with you.
It gets bigger as it expands. Now, I was a corporate executive for a lot of years. And one of the things I saw some of this thing breaking down was I'm sending jobs overseas. I can get the work done cheaper. I'm going to avoid this tax through this type of shelter or whatever the case might be. So now when you look at the working American, and I used to see this because some of the jobs I had with manufacturing, they're scared to death. You know, you're going to move my job. When they started calling people human capital and
Mm-hmm.
assets, and I'm laying people off. They're not saying I'm laying people off. I'm eliminating human capital. All right. That's not selling a factory. That's not selling a machine. That's a person. You just impacted someone's life and you've moved it overseas. And then we saw the meltdown in the financial community. And when people tell me, well, the young people have no loyalty. And I said, well, stop, let's back up here a minute. Let's talk about loyalty. Let's talk about NASA. At my age, NASA is man on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
In their age, NASA is a teacher got blown up. And they saw it. That's not a good feeling for them. They saw their parents and grandparents lose jobs because the company chose to move overseas. Parent didn't do anything wrong. They saw them lose their home through predatory practices. Maybe they should have understood it better, but they didn't, right? But they didn't do anything wrong. And so now you're telling these people you should come here and be loyal and you should toe the line and you should wait your turn. And they're thinking, no chance. I can do this AI. I can get on TikTok. I can get my own business. Why do I want to put up with this program where loyalty's got to go both ways? Correct?
Yep, absolutely. That was what I was looking at this meme on Instagram, and they were saying companies are saying how workers are so disloyal nowadays, because back in the day, people work at the same place for 30 years.
Correct.
Well, they're saying no, people aren't disloyal. You all, the corporations, are the ones that, first of all, you rename people as human capital. Naming is important. What you call a thing is important. So then we engage in labeling and buzzwords so it doesn't sound as badly as, oh, we're laying people off. No, we're just reorganizing our human capital. That's very different from saying we're laying people off who's been working here for 10 years, because although we can afford it, we don't want to pay them a livable wage. We will not give them health insurance. And instead, we'll move the job overseas, where we can then pay somebody overseas $1 an hour with no benefits to be in a cramped warehouse to make the same thing.
Right. You're absolutely right. I've heard that so many times. And one of the things that really sticks out, there are communities. I grew up in Buffalo, New York. Now it's recovering, but Buffalo was a steel town, and so was Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
And the steel mills closed, bang, they're gone. You decimated not just the 20,000 people that worked there, but you decimated the whole community. They called it the Rust Belt. Okay, it was a Rust Belt called for a reason, because nothing was happening. It was completely dying out. And it took a long time. I was 70 years old. This happened when I was in my teens. It took a long time. It takes a long time to recover. And then all these displaced people, now where are they going to go? And now you're breaking up families, and now people are moving away. And now you go through and you further put another nail into that poor choice of words here, but you put another nail into that coffin. And when I talk to a lot of young people, and they just say, go wherever you get a job, because you got to have a job somewhere. Get what you can from that job. Learn what you can. Find out what you don't like. Find out what you like. And then you create your own career path, because the corporations aren't doing that anymore.
They aren't. They aren't. And it's, for me, it's frustrating all around when I look at my students and how despondent some of them are with just the entire system, opportunities that are available for them after college. Again, they're drowning in debt, some of them, not all. And then we say, what are our leaders doing? I and at that point I just laugh, because at this point I love politics. Like I say, it's my first love, but my goodness, I'm at a loss with
I think
when it comes to anything around leadership these days. I'm at a loss, because this is not I the way we conceptualize leadership to be.
mhm.
And we've had leader after leader after leader who's come and said X and nothing happens. And so it's like, what are our leaders doing? So I am not going to vote. And then it
Gets worse.
spirals.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's one thing after another.
Wow.
And
We
like I
could,
say, I am at a complete loss about the way people who've gotten into positions of power have not done for me what I know we can do as a country, and that we have the financial means to do it, and that is bolster education system. I just haven't seen that in a way that would make it, for me, effective, particularly for marginalized populations.
I agree. Well, we could have this conversation for another hour easily, but what last words, Winsome, what last words you want to leave with the listeners around today?
As I think about, I actually was thinking about that. So I'm generally an optimistic person. But when it comes to topics of dealing with marginalized communities, the law, the education system, etc., I was at a conference at Ohio State several years ago, and this professor made a statement that I just absolutely love, because it sums up with my feeling about the system. He said, I am hopeful, but I'm not optimistic. I am hopeful because I am a person of faith, and optimism and hope is rooted in faith. I'm not optimistic because I'm also a researcher, and optimism is rooted in data, and the data is not bearing out where we should be by now, based on everything that everyone has said in terms of the research, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I am. I'm hopeful, but I'm not optimistic.
I think many of us are in that place. It's a not giving up hope, obviously. Things can get better, but it's got to be bottom up.
It has, yep.
It's not going to come top down. It's not. And
At
we've
this
seen it.
point, there's no the trickle down economics of the Reagan era has not trickled down far enough.
It didn't come down. And so the
Yep.
movement has to be bottom up. And I think with the young people, I think they see it. And I think they're taking advantage of what the technology is bringing. They're so far more advanced than I will ever be. And it's coming. It's evolving, and they're starting their own businesses, and they're moving on. And I'm very optimistic also about what's going to happen. I think that it's coming, and there's more awareness, and I think it's on the way. How can people reach you? Because I think you're going to get a lot of feedback on this.
So they can reach me at Chunnu, my last name, CHUNNU, at ohio.edu.
And I also have this information in the summary when it goes public for the world so they can see it.
Okay.
As I said, we're just about out of time. I want to thank Winsome again for sharing, understanding the vibe, reading the room, understanding how we can improve our communities and how we can improve our lives. We have to take action. Now, you can see the show on my podcast, which is called Life Altering Events, my YouTube channel, which is Frank Sakari, and it will also be on Parade Deck. I will send Winsome links and material, and she can post it anywhere she sees fit around the world. If you use the YouTube channel, please subscribe. And let me leave you with this. None of us are in this alone. And the secret to walking on water is to know where the rocks are. And today, Winsome showed us where many, many of those rocks are. Join us again next week for another Life Altering Events. Again, Winsome, thank you so much.
Thank you, Frank, for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.